So, Mike, since we've last spoken, I've been dabbling in some new apps, some new social media apps that are apparently about bringing back the nostalgia of the 2000s internet.
Oh, okay.
You might remember it well. It was a heady time.
I do remember it well, though. It makes me feel old that we're having nostalgia for that time period.
Yeah. The pixels were larger. The harms were mostly spam. It was, it was a nice time, a calm time. There's these new apps that are kind of bringing back that feel, that vibe. And I've been trialing one called Perfectly Imperfect, which looks a bit like MySpace.
Okay.
And it's kind of a magazine type vibe. The prompt on the Perfectly Imperfect app is one I'd like you to answer to start today's podcast.
Okay.
And it is rec ? Ask ? Event ?
Oh. Well,
so the idea being you can, suggest an event to go to because you're cool and hip, or you can provide an ask to the achingly cool group of users on Perfectly Imperfect, or you can ask for a recommendation. Which will you choose?
Exciting. It's very broad. I will go with an event that I think people listening to this podcast will be interested in, especially if you're in the Bay Area, which is that later this month, Stanford is having their annual Trust and Safety Research Conference. And it's always a really good time. It's different than TrustCon. It's a very different kind of event. There's some overlap. But it's just always such a really nice event, really great group of people. I always have such great conversations there. And I'm not going to reveal exactly what it is, but we'll be revealing something during that event that I think some people might find.
A Tech Dirt special.
Tech Dirt Copia special, something good.
Very nice, very nice. I think that would go down very well on Perfectly Imperfect. There's an air of mystery.
Yeah, a little
tease.
A little tease. There we go. So what about you? Do you have a rec, ask, or event for us?
My recommendation is to not get 3 hours of sleep a night because you tend to not be able to read as much about the week's news and content moderation as you'd often like. So I'm coming on this high on adrenaline, low on insight, but let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Let's do this.
Well, you're supposed to use those times that you're awake in the middle of the night, maybe dealing with little people in your house to then read as well.
You're right. I'm doing it all wrong. Hello and welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, your weekly roundup of the major stories about online speech, content moderation, and internet regulation. It's September the 4th, 2025, and this week we're talking about Nigel Farage visiting the Capitol, AI companies collaborating over safety, and whether the evidence against smartphones stacks up. I'm Ben Whitelaw, the founder and editor of Everything in Moderation, and I'm with Mike Masnick, who is both achingly cool and somebody who goes to research conferences.
Yeah, like going to academic research conferences is cool and hip. Yeah, okay.
It's a Venn diagram with a very small overlap, I'd say. But I actually haven't been to the Stanford Trust and Safety Research Conference. I'm a bit jealous that you're going again. Is there anything you're particularly looking out for, or are you going just to kind of get a general sense of what researchers are talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's more the latter. There's always a lot of really interesting stuff because, it is very focused on the research side of it, but it includes like research from not just academics, but also the companies and other folks as well. And so you really begin to get a sense of like some of the more creative things that are happening or like creative interventions and how well those work. There's always a lot of really interesting people there. It's smaller than TrustCon, so it's a little bit more intimate, and you end up having, a lot of really good conversations. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's always a really good event and always like a good, like TrustCon is at the beginning of the summer kind of thing. And then this is at the end of the summer. And so it, it's sort of like the beginning and end of summer in trust and safety. And I think I saw, I'm saying this now without confirming it, but I think like Dave Wilner is giving the keynote this year, which is always, he's always fantastic. And so it should be a really good event overall.
Yeah, Dave was one of the very early kind of trust and safety folks at Facebook and is doing some pretty cool things with AI content moderation.
Yes.
So that will be fun. Academia and research actually is a very useful kind of preempting of today's Ctrl-Alt-Speech. We're going to talk a lot about scientific evidence of research and grounding trust and safety in policy and policy in research. And I think that's something that is a kind of nice segue onto some of our first stories. Before we do, though, just want to talk about the famous and anonymous reviewer from our last podcast. If listeners weren't tuning into that, you might have heard me get a little bit jealous, perhaps. I think that's fair to say.
I think that's right.
A little bit upset about the fact that one of our reviews from one of our listeners,
a very nice review, let me say,
really nice review,
one of the nicest reviews that the podcast has received.
Yeah, really nice. Did not mention me at all.
Right. Yes.
And I didn't expect to hear anything. We didn't.
Well, that's because you thought I wrote it. So let's be clear here. You baselessly accused me of sock puppeting that review because it was very nice to me.
I'm still not 100% sure that is what's happening now. But somebody emailed in claiming to be O Mihailo, who was the username from that review. And I was going to kind of read out what he said. I'm not going to explain any more of who he is and what he's doing, but he is working in trust and safety for a major platform. And he says this, he said, "Sorry, I did not give credit to Ben in my review. I do appreciate him. I think I might have written the review when he was off, but I do appreciate his insight too." I appreciate O Mikhailo writing in, and I've had a bit of back and forth on email. The way that email is written doesn't convince me that somebody wasn't writing that with a gun to their head. You know? I do appreciate him.
Yeah.
I might go back through the podcast episodes, Mike, and just see if you might have said something similar in a similar kind of construction.
Ben, I appreciate you.
I do appreciate you.
I do so much appreciate you.
So that clears things up. It wasn't you. I'm happy to say that I'm 95% sure that is the case. And very grateful to Mikhailo for writing in with his review. If you like the podcast, if you listen to it regularly, please do leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. You can leave us a rating on Spotify. You can write some words on Apple or the other platforms where you might listen. Very much helps us be discovered on the platforms. And we are seeing increasing amounts of listeners find us. Our numbers are going up steadily. And that's all because of the ratings and reviews that you're giving us. So massive, massive help for that. Also great to have some emails in and some contact from potential sponsors. We've been talking about making the podcast sustainable and trying to make it a kind of self-sustaining thing. And we've had some really great companies get in touch about becoming sponsors over the next couple of quarters. So thanks to those folks for getting in touch. Right. So let's get on to this week's stories, Mike. We're going to talk about, as I said, the evidence, the academic evidence around some of these big topics that we talk about on Ctrl-Alt-Speech every week. In doing so, we're going to talk about some of our favorite pantomime villains on Ctrl-Alt-Speech. People who our listeners have heard us talk about. They've heard you give your views on, let's say. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing how you feel about this first one. The big story this week is Jim Jordan's much touted House Judiciary Committee hearing. And now, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, haven't had a lot of sleep, haven't done as much reading as I would have liked. And I purposely steered clear of this kind of circus that was taking shape in your fair country.
With your countrymen.
With my countrymen, that's fair. I would love to hear your take on it. And then there was a kind of interesting letter that was written, which we wanted to dive into as well.
Yeah, and the letter is more interesting than the hearing. The hearing was garbage. There was no reason to watch it. It was a complete circus. It was Jim Jordan doing what Jim Jordan does, which is sort of putting on a theatrical show that has very little basis in reality. And you could see that even from the fact that, and so the framing of the committee was about European censorship of tech companies, whatever. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It was all sort of garbage and made up. And as is the standard practice with U.S. congressional hearings, the majority gets to choose basically 3 witnesses and the minority party gets to choose 1. So the deck is already stacked. Oddly, the witness list was very, very last minute. Last week, they only showed Nigel Farage and Thierry Breton as invited. He did not come.
Thierry didn't show?
It did not show. He said he on short notice was unavailable. And then they filled it in with a couple other people, and they didn't even announce the one witness from the Democrats until the morning of. I mean, the night before I was looking, and it was David Kay, who's a wonderful, very thoughtful professor and expert on free speech, and had been the UN's rapporteur on freedom of expression for many years. Just a super thoughtful and knowledgeable guy. And of course, he was mostly ignored on the panel as this goes. Like, at one point, someone asked him how many classes he's teaching this semester, which is like, why how is that relevant to this discussion? And so most of the panel was garbage. Nigel Farage put on a show and then left early. The Democrats made fun of him for leaving early and for refusing to say if he was going to go have lunch with the president. And so then they were mocking him. And then after he left for an emergency meeting that he couldn't stick around at the hearing for, it was later reported that he went to go do a TV news hit on GB News. Which you can give me your impression of GB News, but I get the sense that it's sort of a Fox News stand-in kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a fair response. I couldn't give you my take without swearing.
Probably. Right. Well, hey, we can swear here. But, it was all sort of for show and nonsense. And as certainly some of the Democrats on the committee made clear, it's pretty crazy to be attacking liberal democratic countries in Europe as being these strict censors at a time when authoritarians around the world, including here in the US, are abusing every lever of power they can to silence dissent and stifle free speech. And so that was made clear by the Democrats. And of course, Jim Jordan, just would ignore all of that and focus on the supposed evils of the DSA. It was very clear at times that, since the panel was sort of supposed to be about the DSA, but then Nigel Farage was there, who does not live in the EU anymore partly because of Nigel Farage, you had this whole Brexit thing. You might remember it, Ben, but
every day.
Yes.
Every day.
So the DSA does not apply in the UK. Now, you have the Online Safety Act, and I've said plenty about my problems with the Online Safety Act. But then Farage was complaining about people who were arrested not under the Online Safety Act, which is not a law that I think even leads to people being arrested, and certainly not under the DSA, but under existing laws that have been around for a while. And I have reasonable complaints about some of those laws, and I have in the past, and I've mocked your fair country about some of those laws in the past, but it had nothing to do with internet laws. And so the whole thing was just kind of this nonsense show trial sort of thing that Jim Jordan is sort of famous for, is not worth paying attention to if you didn't pay attention to. But out of that, there was a really interesting thing, which we did want to talk a little bit about, which was a letter that was put together by a bunch of academics. And there were actually two letters, one that was sent to the committee and Chairman Jordan in particular, and another that was then sent to the EU, effectively informing them of this letter, and to the European Commission. And it basically lays out it is a bit academic and it is a bit policy wonky, but basically lays out how the entire thread of the argument that Jim Jordan was making about how the DSA is designed for censoring conservative viewpoints, which was the argument that he was making, is utter nonsense. And now I have been clear over the years that I have called out the problems with the DSA, and I've certainly called out Thierry Breton and the way that he tried to use the DSA for what clearly seemed to be censorship purposes. And I think this letter actually does a really, really nice job. Not that Jim Jordan will pay attention to it, but it does a really nice job of threading the needle between saying, here's what the DSA actually says, here's what the DSA actually allows, and here's what the DSA does not allow, while simultaneously calling out Thierry Breton in particular for going above and beyond, not in a good way, but going beyond what the DSA actually allows and implying it allowed for censorship when it does not. And so part of the letter is effectively saying it would be nice if the DSA were a little more explicit about what it does not allow, and that it does not allow for censorship, and that it is content neutral or content agnostic in how the enforcement works. And a lot of it is just about risk mitigation. And I'm a little bit torn on this personally, because I agree that is the intent of the DSA. I agree that is, that the process to put together the DSA is way more thoughtful than like anything that the US does in terms of regulation, certainly
Sure.
internet regulation. It was years of back and forth and years of thoughtful approaches. The point that I had made from early on, and I still stick by this, was that parts of the DSA were written in a way that was so vague and so unclear and so open to interpretation that it was only a matter of time until someone tried to use it for censorship purposes, which is what we saw with Thierry Breton. And I think the letter does a nice job of basically saying, Breton clearly went too far and then suffered political consequences from that, right? He lost his job very soon after he started to do that, and people were pretty clear about going after him. And so they the letter argues that the political process worked and limited his ability to abuse the law. I still am not a huge fan of the DSA, but I think that this letter is a very good one and thoughtful in threading that needle in a very careful, nuanced way, which of course will go completely over Jim Jordan's head if he ever even reads it. But I thought it was interesting, and it's signed by a ton of academics, a ton of actual experts in the field, which again is another reason why Jim Jordan will ignore it.
Yeah. I mean, for context, for people who weren't following the Thierry Breton story that we talked about, the whole kind of narrative that has been building over the last couple of years, this is Commissioner Breton, who used to be in kind of charge of the DSA within the EU, and who in 2023 said that the social media platform should remove hateful content.
Yeah.
And the DSA is not about removing hateful content. And so there was other issues where he kind of went up against Elon Musk.
Yes.
And wrote kind of odd letters, which we flagged at the time, about the importance of Twitter and its actions around the European elections at the time, and kind of threatening Twitter in a way that felt odd, and which kind of led to Elon Musk kind of reacting in kind, let's say. There was a bit of a kind of mano a mano
reacting in an Elon Musk way. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I miss that guy. And both of them, actually.
Yeah.
And so, so it's fascinating that this group of academics, who, as you say, are super reputable in the field, and who not only are based in Europe, but also include academics in the US.
Yeah.
Which is, fascinating. It's US academics kind of calling out, I guess, where the DSA has merit and what it's for in a very kind of nuanced way, in a way that not a lot of Americans, I would say, beyond yourself and some others, would actually do. And so the fact that they've got together and organized in this way is really interesting. And, it's a really helpful, I guess, addition to the ongoing transatlantic beef that our countries have, and the EU has with the US as well, which I think we're going to see play out over the next kind of 6 months as some of those trade implications that we've talked about start to kind of come to the surface a bit more.
Yeah, I think that there will be a lot more. And it's, this is a thoughtful, nuanced approach from experts in a world that doesn't believe in thoughtful nuance or experts.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a very helpful segue onto our next story. We talked about Jim Jordan. Our next story is about our other persona non grata. Yeah, I haven't read Anxious Generation, I'll be honest. I've read a lot of commentary about it, but I know you have. And I know you're not the biggest fan of Jonathan Haidt. And so
I have no problem with the man. I have a problem with what he says.
Yeah. Play the ball, not the man, as they say. So his March 2024 book, The Anxious Generation, has sold millions of copies, as many people will know. Many of our listeners would have read it. And his argument that the kind of mental health and attentional decline of children can be put down to social media and phones has been taken up significantly by parents who kind of have this, I guess, feeling and see this day to day, and also by teachers who are kind of on the front lines in terms of this stuff in schools. And so it's very, very interesting and helpful that this week we had a pretty definitive piece by the Times Educational Supplement, the UK journal magazine for teachers, looking exactly at this. And so I wanted to kind of share a bit about what this piece said and what it kind of purports to do. The kind of TLDR on it is that basically lots of professors and academics do not agree with Jonathan Haidt and what he comes out with in his book, and is very critical of kind of his claims. And that's something you've talked about Mike, before. I'm very interested in your take and what they say, basically. And there are academics from Oxford, Cambridge, the University of Bath, Washington, Brown. It is like some of the best professors in their fields. All of them that have been quoted in this piece say the data that Haidt uses in his book is noisy, that there are lots of other contributing factors to what it is that he says the data is doing, that he doesn't reference, that he overclaims on that data, which obviously is never good, and that there are some children who are more affected than others by things like social media and phones, which again is something you talked about, the situational factors that kids and their lives and how they exist can lead to changes in mental health and lead to the kind of suicides or deaths that we've talked about on this podcast in quite tragic terms.
Yeah.
So the piece is a long one. It's a fascinating kind of pulling of lots of different threads about whether Jonathan Haidt's claim should be believed. And if we're to believe what these academics say, Mike, we should take it with a big pinch of salt. You must be pretty happy with that.
I mean, yeah, granted, right, there's some confirmation bias, right? So I had written, right as the book came out, I was asked to write a review for it for the Daily Beast last year. And I covered a lot of this similar ground in terms of like, the book is just, it's shoddy. It's not a strong book. And I quoted some of the same people when I wrote my review of it. And what struck me about this. So first of all, for people who don't know, TES tests is like, it's well respected. It goes back to, it's over a century old, and it's sort of like the primary educational journal in the UK. It's a big deal. And the quotes in here are, I mean, astounding how directly people call out. I mean, there's one that says, when I read the book, I found it really hard to believe it was written by a fellow academic.
Yeah.
These are not people pulling punches. The other one said, the work of John Haidt doesn't come up unless it's the butt of a joke. I mean, like, this is not like, people are not.
They're not pussyfooting around, are they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And throughout this article, it just, rips to shreds, like all the different bits, the claims that he makes, and it goes through why they're just not supported by the evidence. And the academics here are very clear that there are things that are worth studying and there are things that are worth understanding, but he's way overclaiming the impact, and it's just not seen in the data, which is, a point that I and many others have raised as well. And I think it's just a really, really damning article in a really respected source from a whole long list of respected academics. And so it'll be interesting. I mean, he more or less dismisses it, and, any sort of academic criticism, he completely brushes off and ignores. And he can do that because his bank account, I'm sure, is huge, as this book has sold a ridiculous number of copies and is talked about. And, I found it interesting that basically the same day that this article came out, Politico had an article, which I find an interesting contrast to it, which says, it's titled, "There's Only One True Bipartisan Issue Left." And it argues that the one true bipartisan issue is that Jonathan Haidt is right. That, smartphones and social media are terrible for kids. And so where the academics here are saying that this is complete garbage and is not supported by the evidence, the political class, and I would say the media class as well, have completely embraced it. And there's an element here that I think is just pure confirmation bias. And Haidt, even in the TES article, more or less says like, well, everyone knows this is true, like in their heart. And it's like, you need evidence to support these things. And like, just the fact that people believe it doesn't actually make it true.
Yeah.
And so I think we're in this world right now, which is a little scary, especially, for people who deal in disinformation and conspiracy theories, and how do you deal with that, and how do you respond to misinformation? This is one of the most successful misinformation campaigns around.
Yeah. I've got some thoughts on that. I mean, so I'm watching The Jury, which is a program where two juries watch a reenactment of a trial at the same time without knowing each other exists. Right? It's a kind of interesting social experiment.
That's fascinating.
And I haven't got to the end yet. But when I was reading this TES piece, I was thinking about how in Jonathan Haidt's world, you would just let the 12 jurors decide the outcome of the case without seeing any evidence. That's kind of the analogy, right? It's like putting a jury in a room and letting them kind of use their own personal experience to decide whether somebody is convicted and jailed, whether the evidence says so or not. Is it a bit like that, right? And Haidt's book, in many ways, is, I was thinking, like a bit like the content that he so worries about that children are consuming on platforms.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like the equivalent, it's the book equivalent of viral content, right? It's easily digestible.
Yes.
It's based on kind of loose truths. It kind of preys on people's insecurities, which,
Yes.
Some of the most viral content that reaches millions of people does. And it pitches groups against each other, parents, people who know and have suffered at the hands of social media versus those who maybe have benefited. And so he's almost doing exactly what the platforms have done in many ways. And the thing that is he's kind of concerned about and trying to stop children from suffering from, he's doing the adult book equivalent of that, which I think is kind of interesting. And his narrative is winning out, as you say.
Oh, yeah.
The narrative of Jonathan Haidt is more powerful, and some of the academics talk about this in the piece, is more powerful than the more kind of reflective, more hard to discern, subtle evidence that is there for people to read it.
Yeah. And, it reminds me of something, and I wrote about this in my sort of wrap-up piece about TrustCon. I had multiple conversations at TrustCon that really stuck with me from people in trust and safety who were talking about how much damage to trust and safety Haidt's book has done. And it hadn't even occurred to me, I think, before that. I obviously had problems with the book. I thought it was misleading. I thought that people buying into it was leading to really bad policy and very problematic outcomes. But it hadn't occurred to me how directly it was negatively impacting the work of trust and safety professionals, in that it was effectively saying that they don't exist, right? It's just saying that the internet itself, social media, is just inherently bad for kids. And all the work that trust and safety professionals put into actually creating thoughtful, compelling interventions that are helpful and that do protect kids and do help kids be safe, feel safe, all of these things are completely dismissed. And it's this idea that anything that the kids are using online must be bad. And, when you have all the political class and the media class buying into that, it wipes away the field of trust and safety and acts as if it doesn't exist or that it can't do anything. When they spend so much time, the number of people working on child safety initiatives that are having real impact, that are completely ignored by the book and in fact dismissed by the book.
Yeah.
And so the number of people who mentioned that it was doing real harm to the entire field, it really stuck with me.
And so it was kind of coming up in conversations and was felt to have impacted the discussion in companies. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, the result of the book is you have, multiple politicians. I think Barack Obama put it on the top of his must-reads of 2024. Yeah. And Bill Gates talked about it. You have all these people talking about it as if it's this accurate, factual book. And it's so terribly written, but that's a side note. It's just not, it's not well written. But it leads to this sort of dismissal of the idea that there is a role for people within the companies to do stuff. It assumes that the only way to deal with this is to have policymakers do these outright bans, which, again, a lot of the evidence suggests, will actually make things worse rather than better.
Well, that's the thing. Not only has it affected trust and safety professionals in the way that you're talking about there and the way that you heard at TrustCon, but I was thinking about the timings of the book and his recommendations and the extent to which that might have impacted the regulatory conversation now, right? So March 2024, the book comes out. It sets out this problem that many people have heard of, and then it suggests kind of 3 ideas for solving this, right? As far as I understand it, his ideas were an increase in the age at which kids
to 16.
Are kind of adults online to 16. Age verification is posited as one of the answers, which we've talked about has large issues. We're seeing that bear out in lots of ways. And then the phone-free schools idea, which we've again discussed and has very significant holes. And, some schools are already using, so why there needs to be a blanket approach to that, I don't know. Those are his 3 ideas. We've seen an increase in people talking about all of those things, I would say, in that time. And I wonder if we'll look back and say, to what extent was the anxious generation responsible for some of these kind of wrong turns in the road when we came to regulating the internet? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's a huge deal. I mean, here in California, the state senator or representative, I forget which, who passed the law banning phones in schools here in California, came to the hearing carrying his book.
Wow.
Like it's clearly having an impact. And the thing, and I had in my review of the book, I wrote about this. The first half of the book is sort of trying to lay out the problem, and it presents a whole bunch of evidence. And as I point out in my review, it's very cherry picked and it ignores counter evidence and I think really misrepresents the evidence, which is what the academics in this TES piece are saying as well. The thing that really got me, though, is that the second half of the book, there's a weird interlude between the first half and the second half where it just talks about like spirituality and how kids need to be more spiritual, which is just like, I don't know, based on something. It's really unclear. But then the latter part of the book is all the policy recommendations, which he presents no evidence in that section of the book to support those. These are all just sort of like, well, I think so. And that was the part that got me. For everyone talking about like how the book is so full of evidence, the policy recommendations are not based on evidence at all. The policy recommendations, I mean, the whole book feels rushed, but that section feels especially rushed. And it's just kind of like he waves off. Like he mentions the concerns about age verification, but waves them off in a sort of like, oh, these nerds can nerd harder and figure out a way. There must be a way to do age verification that is privacy protective. And doesn't actually grapple with the actual challenges of that.
Yeah. And you know what, as well, Nigel Farage said exactly the same thing in an interview recently about the Online Safety Act. Okay. He said, there has to be a tech answer. Age verification has its issues because of the VPN problem, but there has to be a tech answer. Like none of these guys, men, seem to be able to kind of take the evidence for what it is and continually kind of strive for some sort of magic potion or, that is going to fix these various harms. If they listen to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, they would know that is not the case.
And I will just throw out there too, really quickly, I wrote about this a few weeks ago, but since we're promoting academics and thoughtful, reasonable academics here today, Steve Beloven, I think is how you pronounce his last name, who's a computer security expert, just like one of the most respected guys in the field, released a paper a few weeks ago, which didn't get much attention. I did write about it, but I didn't see it written about anywhere else, about the idea of privacy protecting age verification, and basically explained how you would do it and then why it wouldn't actually work. And
right,
so it was sort of this like, yes, it is possible to create something that you could call privacy protecting, but the practical realities of it is that you can't do it in a way that actually works. It was a very thoughtful paper. And again, an important contribution because you have people out there saying, oh, yes, of course, there's a way to do privacy protective age verification. And yet this security professional sort of walked through the different possibilities and is like, this will not work. This will not protect privacy for these exact reasons. And
interesting.
We're seeing this where the experts are, again, being thoughtful and nuanced and presenting expertise, and the world wants easy, simple answers that are probably wrong.
Yeah. And we'll include that report, that research in our show notes, as ever, with all of the links from today's podcast, and a shout out to all of the outlets that we're obviously talking about today. It's their coverage and their reporting that means we can kind of do Ctrl-Alt-Speech in this way. So yeah, not a lot of reason to be chipper or to be, happy from those two stories, Mike. But there's a bit of lightness, I think, in the next three stories, which are all about AI.
I don't know if they're okay. I'm wondering how you get lightness out of this next one, but okay.
Yeah, maybe not lightness. I mean, these stories are all about the kind of way that AI is seeping into very human moments that we all experience, like doctor's appointments and like death and grief and all of these things. And I think, yes, they're complex, but as we'll find out, there are some upsides. It's just about how we go about them. So do you want to talk first about the Rest of World piece that you read this week?
Yeah, this is really fascinating. It's a long read. It's not a quick one in Rest of World called My Mom and Dr. DeepSeek. And it's a very personal story about the author's mother who lives in rural China and has significant health problems. and has had health problems for a while. And to go to a doctor, it's a very long and involved process, has to travel for like 2 hours each way. And how she has just started using DeepSeek, which is the popular Chinese AI tool, which made a big stir earlier this year because it was developed much more inexpensively than the big foundation models that we usually talk about, and yet had quality that was on par with them. And so the article goes deep into talking about how the author's mother was using DeepSeek for medical advice and sometimes getting bad advice, sometimes getting good advice, but always getting some advice. And how much what the mother kept pointing out was that it wasn't condescending to her. Whereas, like, it's not even just the travel to the doctor that was the problem. It was that she would travel to the doctor and the doctor would talk to her for just a couple minutes and not in a human way, just sort of looking down at you and saying, do this, do that, do that, and not hearing you, not having a better discussion with you. Whereas DeepSeek was always there, always available, and always willing to be nice to you, even if it was wrong. And so I came out of the article really conflicted because there's this element of like, yeah, going to the doctor is sometimes a pain. And I've certainly experienced where like doctors feel very dismissive and they're in there for a very short period of time. They never have time to really talk or like raising concerns with them. Like I had a minor medical issue last year that I ended up having to go see a bunch of doctors for. And over again, like I would come in with a whole bunch of questions and I would never even get a chance to ask them because the doctors they had like a script that they would run through and there was no moment in which you were allowed to ask questions or discuss. And like, I remember one where like, I was literally like, the doctor walked me to the front desk at the end and like handed me off to the front desk to like set up the next appointment without ever giving me a chance to say anything. And I was like, I feel like I'm, a cog in the machine. And so I could totally see where it's like, oh, if I can actually talk to something and get thoughtful answers, even if they're wrong. And so there's like a part that everyone reads this and is probably horrified because it's like, well, you don't take the medical advice, like you can't trust it. But you have to recognize the human aspect of it, of like a human wants to feel heard. And the medical system, the way we have it now, isn't always working that way. Now, I had told you right before we started as well, like I do have a counterexample, which was last year when I went for my annual physical. The doctor came in and had asked at the beginning, are you okay if I record this using an AI tool? And at the end of the physical, we'll go through the notes together and make sure that it accurately captured everything. And she said to me, like, if we do it this way, I can spend more time talking to you rather than typing in the notes. That is exactly what happened, where we did the physical and then we reviewed the notes and it was good. It was accurate and it captured everything, I think, in more detail than I would normally get if she was typing the notes. And we actually had time to talk and I actually felt very comfortable with it. And the physical is usually a little longer than, other kinds of doctor's appointments. So maybe that was different too. But like it was, so I think in that case, it was like the technology was assistive, not replacing. But I understand why people are seeing the technology as something that is like, it just makes them feel more comfortable.
Yeah. My wife is a doctor and she has lots of doctor friends. And the thing that they all say, particularly those who are GPs, the kind of general practitioners, the kind of first line of defense here in the UK, most of them within NHS, is that people just want to talk. They're not really looking for necessarily a kind of medical advice per se, but they're looking to be heard.
Yes.
And there's, there are specific people that go to doctor's appointments and they are often people who are less heard in society. So the doctor's role, according to, again, this kind of self-selecting sample of friends, is that doctor's appointments are about being heard in the way that you're kind of describing. And here in the UK, you get 15 minutes for an appointment. So, you've got to...
That's longer than the US, by the way.
Right, is it? Okay. I mean, that's either way, you've got to speak pretty fast. And the validation, I think, is what this piece brings out for me. Is like the validation that people want and the fact that they want to know that, yes, this is an issue and that they're not going mad is often the first step. And that's interesting because we hear a lot of commentary and analysis about how these foundational models are too subservient and too kind of sycophantic. And, they say, well done, Ben, on what a great suggestion that is. Here's a few tweaks to it. I think your average person particularly in the healthcare context, doesn't mind that at all, would be my bet. And certainly in this case for DeepSeek and this woman in China, there was no qualms at all with the model saying, yeah, that's a problem. I can understand that you're in pain or that you're suffering. That's often the first thing. We forget that, that's maybe where these AI models are better than humans. My only other thought on that, Mike, was like, so much of the AI model safety question has been discussed in relation to children.
Yeah.
We hear people, the suicides we touched on, where children are left unsupervised and they are given advice that is unsuitable for them. This is a case where an adult has voluntarily used the model and continued to use it despite being told by her daughter that it's not safe and that she shouldn't follow that advice. What do we do in this situation?
Yeah.
It's very hard to regulate an adult using a piece of technology in this way. The Jonathan Haidts of this world are going to find that pretty hard to regulate or to advise platforms to amend their policies to cater for, because she's in her 60s or 70s. So it's a really fascinating piece on a lot of dimensions, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's worth thinking about. I don't think there's an easy answer to this. I mean, once again, sort of complexity and nuance.
I think we need there is no easy answer bell, or something else.
the bell is already taken.
Yeah, I know. I'll have a think.
Klaxon, air horn, something. Yeah,
to complement the bell, to make the podcast a bit more interesting orally. But yeah, you're totally right. It's that all over again. Let's go on to the kind of the next AI story then, which again, maybe is hard to claim is a kind of nice story. But I'm going to try and convince you that it is.
It could be.
Yeah, it is. So as many of our listeners know, there's a growing trend of AI bots that are being kind of trained on the voices and the text outputs of dead people who have died. And they're called dead bots. I don't know if that's the best or nicest term for them, but that's kind of the way that we've come to describe them. Some people are calling it the digital afterlife industry, which seems a little bit more poetic, a little bit more fitting perhaps. But,
it just feels euphemistic in so many ways, right?
Either way, whatever we're calling it, this NPR piece that we read this week has predicted that there is going to be a rise in this industry. It's going to increase exponentially, and that it's going to become commercialized very, very quickly. A report that's linked to the piece says that this is an industry that's going to be $80 billion within the next decade, so a massive industry. And the bots that we're seeing being created at the moment are a mix of kind of personal, people who are missing loved ones, but also people who are being kind of created to advocate for particular causes, which I had no idea about. So examples are given around victims of road safety accidents who are being brought back to give presentations and talks about things that they previously wrote or said, people who were killed and therefore are being used and kind of wheeled out to talk about gun laws and the unsuitability of those. And so it's a really interesting, again, quite kind of complex article about where dead bots can be used to memorialize somebody, to have them bring back memories of somebody who is lost, and to kind of keep their memory and their ideas and their voice and their personhood alive, but also perhaps how they could be used in ways to advocate for causes and concerns that maybe are not what we'd all want to be used for, or in a way that is perhaps not even explicitly something that those people have advocated for, right? So when privacy laws are so, I would say, so basic, and we have so much discussion about them, it seems mad that we have this emerging industry that kind of uses the text and images and outputs of dead people,
Yeah, it feels very exploitive, right? I mean, it's like, it's you can see how it would be abused. And the article itself talks about the possibility of using it in advertising. Can you imagine like your dead grandmother, like coming to you to like advertise something? Like,
what do you think somebody will use our voice to advertise, Mike, when we're gone?
I mean, there is, right? Like, I did go through this thought exercise of like, well, what happens, when I die? Like, do I care? And I'm not sure if I do that much. Like, but I can understand why people would.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, once I'm gone, I'm gone. If you want to make up a fake Mike Masnick bot, like go for it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Selling tires.
yeah, because my enthusiasm for tires.
Really good car tires. That's
Yeah.
I would buy car tires off you, Mike.
It's funny. I'm literally trying to buy new tires for my car right now as we speak. And for some reason, I couldn't get the website to work. So yeah, I have thoughts on tires all of a sudden. Yeah. But and now,
I didn't even know that.
Now whoever wants to make a bot has me saying that. So
yeah,
so you can do that. Yeah, it's sort of strange. I think this is one of those things that society is going to have to adapt to. And like there are like science fiction books about the idea of like uploading yourself to the cloud, and like that was more in the idea of like turning yourself into an immortal being with your brain in the cloud. But this is like kind of sort of like that, because there are questions of, if you upload your brain, is that really you? Like, Cory Doctorow had a book about this very topic not many years ago, I don't know how long ago, 5-10 years ago, that really raised some of these issues as well around like, what does it mean to upload your brain to the cloud? That's like if you're choosing to do it. But what if, in these cases, your family is doing it? I think it raises a whole bunch of really interesting questions. I don't think there are easy answers. And in the US, at least, the article talks about sort of the state of, here we usually refer to them as publicity rights laws, which were initially intended for like, can you make a famous person advertise or appear to endorse a product? And there are questions about when they're alive and then when they're dead. Some of those laws don't apply after someone has died. And there was a whole legal dispute about like Marilyn Monroe, and could you put a fake Marilyn Monroe into a commercial? And so I don't think we as a society have figured this out yet. And I think it's going to become more of a challenge. And as with anything, there are complexities and nuances. Yeah. And, everyone who thinks there's an easy answer to this discovers that your easy answer probably has a whole bunch of trade-offs that you haven't considered.
Yeah. I can just imagine Charlie Brooker sitting back and like laughing at this. You know Charlie Brooker,
sure.
The guy who wrote Black Mirror.
Yeah, I mean, this is like classic Black Mirror fodder. So
yeah, there's a whole episode in which like a woman's boyfriend dies in a car accident, and she brings him back as a kind of AI generated synthetic person. Like, I think Charlie Brooker's got a lot to, he's got a lot of this responsibility is him for this stuff. I wonder if we can get him on the podcast one day. That'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be great. That would be fun.
But yeah, so I think I convinced you there that there was an element of lightness, and maybe niceness to that use of AI. The final story we touched on is the companies who are going to have to think about all of these use cases and how they're responding to it, right? This is, again, I think a positive development in the industry.
Yeah, I think this one is really fascinating. It's based on both OpenAI and Anthropic, which are sort of the two of the leading foundation model AI companies. And this is based on an article in TechCrunch. They apparently agreed to allow each other to safety test each other's models. And there was a period of time where they opened it up via public API. They gave each other access to it, to a version of the models without all of the safety guardrails. Right. I believe there were some, but they left open, they gave a sort of open version that they would use internally for safety testing, and allowed each other to test. And then each of them released a report about what they found about the opposing models. And this was really just a fascinating concept beyond what they found. And like, they have different reports about like this model did this model did that. Just the fact that like these two companies, which are competitors, and Anthropic was founded by ex-OpenAI people who felt that OpenAI was going in the wrong direction. Just the fact that the two of them got together and agreed to open up each other's models to be safety tested by the other is something I don't remember ever hearing of in like a trust and safety context. I don't think we've had like, Facebook letting Twitter people safety test their systems. And, I mean, it's a different context with AI than social media, but it just struck me as a really, really interesting experiment. I'm not sure, it sort of comes across like some of the quotes read to me, at least. Maybe I'm reading between the lines in ways that like, there are a little bit of snarkiness towards each other. And it feels like there was like a grudging agreement to do this, and like
Right.
neither side is entirely happy with it, but they did it and they released the research on it. And I just thought we're entering a really interesting world in which that kind of thing is possible, and that is an idea that people are considering, this sort of allowing competitors to safety test your systems.
Yeah. I mean, playing devil's advocate here, Mike, is this something that they might have done just to appease regulators? So they can say, hey, maybe that you don't have ways of checking our models or auditing our models in ways that you agree on yet. But hey, we actually did this, or we let Anthropic do it, or we let OpenAI do it. So we are trying.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't get that sense. It's possible that there was a regulatory component to it, but I think if it was really designed to sort of get regulators off their back, I would picture them doing it in a slightly different way, which would be more designed to sort of appease regulators. I didn't get that sense from this. It may be true, but my guess is that this was just like an actual intellectual exercise that both companies and their security teams were sort of excited about the possibility of testing each other's models.
Yeah. That is interesting if that is the case. And, like you say, there is so much heat on those companies right now.
Yeah.
There is so much emphasis on how they approach safety that to have them look under each other's hoods is I think, a positive thing. We can definitely say that. So, hey, we got there eventually today. We've ended on a bit of a bright note, and we'll need to take that into next week, Mike.
All right.
We'll try our best to do so.
Try to find brighter, happier stories.
Yeah, we are somewhat beholden to the news agenda as ever on Ctrl-Alt-Speech. That brings us to the end of today's episode, Mike. We have covered a whole raft of stories, including our good friends Jonathan and Jim. We've tried to lift up good academia and the importance of an evidence-based, and we'll continue to do that on Ctrl-Alt-Speech as ever. Rate us and review us, listeners, wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll hopefully see you next week for more of the same.